Where did the Houthis get their weapons? Would the Houthis survive without Iran's help? How are the Houthis different than the Iran-backed Hezbollah? How did the Houthi insurgency develop anyway? Are the Houthis a ragtag army? Welcome to Unravelling the Middle East. I'm Adel Ali, your host. Please join me and my guest, Dr. Charles Schmitz, as we unravel the Middle East. Dr. Schmitz, in the last segment, we started getting into our current moment in history and the Houthis and the conflict, geopolitics, and we drew comparisons and also similarities between Iran's Shiaism, which is different than the Shiaism that the Houthis purport to practice. Before we talk about that more, I'm interested in this reference that you always hear in the news. You hear news anchors referring to the Houthis as a non-state actor, and you also call them a movement. I've heard that too. For preparation for this conversation, I was looking at maps and everything, and they actually hold a sizable chunk of Yemen in this sort of southwest, close to the strategic points that you were talking about. I don't know, is it port of Mocha and other places close to the Red Sea? So they are in a way a government, aren't they?
Oh, very much so. Just for clarification, if you look at the map of Yemen, they're in the northwest.
Oh, northwest. Okay.
Their port is Hodeidah, not Mocha, because in Mocha there's enemies of the Houthi.
Oh, I see. My bad. Okay, thank you for correcting that.
But yes, so that's a key point. Okay, so back to in our previous segment, we talked about the government of Ali Abdullah Saleh attacking the Houthi, and following the killing of Hussein al-Houthi, Hussein's father took up the movement, and there was another iteration of war, and there were 6 Houthi wars between 2004 and 2010, in which, in essence, the government in essence created an insurgency. In other words, they gave the Houthi lots of experience in fighting. And the Houthi learned how to do it, and they learned how to do it very well. So it transforms from a cultural movement to a political movement. Now it's a military insurgency. And the key there is that the Houthi, they come from the far north. They know the north socially very well, and they were very astute at using tribes and using divisions among tribes and within tribes in order to prosecute their war, to their defense. And they hold off. And in the 6th war, I think in the 5th as well, the Saudis were involved. They were bombing, and they had ground troops involved as well. And the Houthi won, basically, in the sense that they held off all of these regular military forces. And then shortly afterwards, the Arab Spring broke out, and Ali Abdullah Saleh was removed from power in 2012. And Ali Abdullah Saleh is sort of Machiavelli on steroids. He knows how to stay in power, or at least he did. He played his cards well for a long time. And so, he was thrown out of power in 2012 in an agreement, and he didn't like that. So he secretly allied with the Houthi, and he
allied with them.
Yes.
He was fighting wars with them. I don't know, 6 wars, and he had their founder killed. Now he allied with them. Interesting.
And now he's using military that's allied with him and tribes that are allied with him to say, support the Houthi. And
what?
Yes, because the Houthi are challenging. The Houthi are challenging in a way. They're challenging the government, the transitional government. And Ali Abdullah Saleh very much would like to challenge that government as well, because he'd like to get back into power. And he saw the Houthi as a means to get back into power. And so the Houthi benefited tremendously from that. And the Houthi came down, and in 2014, they surrounded Sana'a, the capital city, and they came into the capital city. And at that point, they installed a government that everybody was in favor of. It was a technocratic government. The Houthi always say they're fighting corruption. And they didn't put their own people into power. They helped install this technocratic government, which was actually an agreement signed with the UN at the time.
Oh,
And but then they sent out what they called supervisors, and the supervisors went into all the offices of the government and whatnot to oversee and root out corruption and whatnot. But actually, they're taking over the government. And so, what I'm saying here is, in essence, the Houthi inherited both much of the Yemeni military and the Yemeni state. So, in effect, yes, they are the Yemeni state. And you indicated on the map there, they got this chunk. It's a sizable chunk. It's in the northwest, but whereas I don't know what it is. Maybe a quarter or a third of Yemeni territory. It's 80% of the population. That's where everyone lives. And so
oh,
they are the de facto state, but not de jure, because the forces that are allied against them, Yemeni forces that are allied against them, they see themselves as the inheritors of the transitional government, which is the legal government of Yemen. And that's the big card they have. So the Houthis do not have international recognition. The only state that recognizes them is Iran. Nobody else recognizes them. And they recognize the IRG, the internationally recognized government, is, well, it's technically in Aden, but it's usually in Riyadh. That's where most of the ministers are.
and the transitional government that is recognized as the legal government of Yemen was the one that was backed by Saudi Arabia in the war that happened. Just as an aside, it both frightens me and also impresses me that the Houthis were not defeated with all the technological sort of superiority of Saudi military. Is Houthi defenses all coming from Iran? It's got to be more than that.
Oh yeah, no. The Houthi without the Iran Houthi are still there.
Okay.
And
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. The Houthi are not an Iranian creation at all. The Houthi are a gift to Iran, put it that way, because the Houthi did all the work. And the Houthi are these are sophisticated people. Sometimes they're painted as a ragtag army. They were a ragtag army at arms. They were very sophisticated. They're very sharp. And they use the terrain. I mean, in that sense, Yemen is like Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires. So the Egyptians went in and were defeated, right? The Egyptians thought they would run over the Yemen. And no, the Egyptians had to pull out. They were defeated. That's considered Nasser's Vietnam. And yes. And
is Yemen mountainous? Is that the case?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The highest peak outside of Sana'a is 13,000 feet.
Wow.
You can go from 13,000 feet, 40 kilometers by the bird flight to the sea,
Flies.
to the Red Sea. So it's very steep down on the Red Sea coast. Yes. Oh,
Wow.
it's beautiful, gorgeous. And the Houthi used those mountains very well. The Saudis, let's be clear, the Saudis, how did the Saudis participate in the war? It was mostly their air campaign. That's how they participated. And then backing Yemeni forces in the Eastern Desert. So they were training and equipping and paying for Yemeni forces in the Eastern Desert. Those were Muslim Brotherhood. And their attack was, and they thought for some reason that the Air Force would, the Houthi would, I don't know what, they would crumble or whatever. But no, the Houthi used the terrain and used their resources very well and survived it. That's why, in these current attacks by the United States, everybody's kind of going, well, they held off the Saudis, which, by the way, the U.S. was giving intelligence and guidance for targeting
to the Saudis.
To the Saudis, yes. Yes.
So if the Saudis, you chuckle at that question, and it makes me chuckle because I think I know where you're going. If the Saudis couldn't, with all the intelligence given to them by the U.S., can we do it?
Correct.
So, which naturally goes to this question that it's been sort of building in my mind is, what's in it for the Houthis to attack merchant ships it's one thing to be supporting the people of Palestine, Gaza. It's another thing to take up arms. Here's a fledgling, let's call it government, that is trying to survive. This is a bold action. Aren't they afraid that, let's say, I don't know, England, the US, France, a bunch of other countries are actually going to take even more serious military action against them?
They would like that. So
They would like that.
yes.
What?
Oh, they were
I don't
ecstatic.
follow. What do you mean?
They were ecstatic when the Americans decided to bomb. So, so
What's the internal politics for that? I don't get it.
yeah, yeah. So the Houthi very much were born of an insurgency. They were born of warfare and fighting. And then when the Saudis attacked, they fought for 8 years. And so the Houthi are very good at war. They're very good at confronting an enemy. And the war had been winding down. And in fact, the special envoy of the UN to Yemen had announced that there was an agreement to a political settlement of Yemen. That there was a road path that everybody had agreed upon to get back to a normal political process.
That sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds very good. Uh, and so there's a stream of thought that says, well, the Houthi really didn't like that. That they knew how to fight, and they knew how to mobilize people for difficult circumstances and for foreign aggression and all of this. But they weren't so good at governance and the being able to govern a country and provide for people's needs and whatnot. Yemen is very poor, and they were frightened by that. I don't really buy that. I think the Houthi are very much in command, and they know what they're doing. And I mean, any government's going to have challenges in Yemen, but I think the Houthi were. Could deal with it effectively. I'm not sure they were frightened by peace.
Do you think
The opponents say they're frightened by peace?
That's what the opponents say. Do you think war and being in conflict legitimizes their power? Is that it?
Yeah. And I think it was an opportunity for them. Their chant, their slogan, death to Israel, death to America. I mean, it was pretty remote. If they were way up in the north, in the 2000s, and there's no Americans and there's no Israelis, and that's irrelevant to the whole thing. That was designed to put needles in to irritate the president of Yemen is what it was designed to do. But now, wait a minute, they can do something real that is in line with their ideology. And you have to recognize that a big part of their ideology is that they are moral, that they are humane, that they have the big powers of the world are the aggressors, and they are the immoral people, and they use might over right. But the Yemeni have faith. They may not have power. They may not have all the means, but their faith is guiding them through, and God will guide them through this, and God will guide the righteous. And they position themselves as the righteous, and they position the fact that the Americans are attacking them, and they succeed in firing back at the Americans and holding the Americans off as God's on their side.
Wait, Dr. Schmitz, is this ideology a front, a ruse to keep them in power, or do they really?
No, they believe that. They believe that. Oh yeah, they believe.
Oh
that.
wow.
Yeah.
Because one can say that about Iran. Sort of the ideology has kind of gone, and it's all about geopolitics now, and there's much corruption in Iran's government. But you're saying no, they really believe that.
Oh, the Houthis?
Yeah.
Sure, they believe that. And their stance on Palestine has gained them tremendous support amongst in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, and critically for the Houthi, their opponents in all the territories of their opponents. People are saying, oh, the Houthi are, they're principled and they are, standing up against the aggressors, and
Like
they
the
are actually doing
Salafis
something.
and the Muslim Brotherhood, they're respecting them. When you say they've gained support amongst in the Middle East and other Muslims, does that support come with money, resources?
Oh, no,
No.
no, but it's moral support. Everybody's yay the Houthi, and so it's given them a lot of political capital inside of Yemen in particular.
So when
Um,
you say that the Houthis would be there even without Iran, where do they get their resources?
oh, so the if we're talking about weapons, Yemen's awash in weapons. It's got
Awash in weapons.
Oh yeah, it's got the highest per capita gun ownership. No, excuse me, the second highest. The United States has the highest. Yemen has the
Oh,
second highest.
that's hard for me to know that we have more weapons
Yemen
than
Yemen
Yemen.
has the second highest. There was no problem with weapons even before the Iran. In fact, the Iranians, as far look, I'm not a spy. I'm not an intelligence person, so I don't know the details on this. But as the general impression is that what the Houthi get from the Iranians is, sort of technological instruction and whatnot, how to put together missiles and how to put together drones and how to use them and this sort of thing. But they inherited Ali Abdullah Saleh's arsenal. It's huge. Ali Abdullah
Oh,
Saleh had
wow.
tons of weapons and whatnot. So that's not a problem. And then in terms of the economy, yeah, I mean, Yemen's very poor, and Yemen used to be an oil economy, but it's that has largely run out. But the Houthi have sort of reconfigured the northern economy in a way that all of the flows of revenue go through them. And so they're able to tax and they're able to, skim off of controlling the oil trade, for example, or, controlling other commodities.
Like a
And
government.
yes, oh yeah, very much so.
um,
Very much so. They are channeling resources, and so they've been able to get through. And they've handled the economy far better than their opponents, and that's not lost on people that live in Yemen.
which gives them credibility, perhaps, in
Mhm.
the eyes of everyday person.
Yeah. Well, we say yes and no. I mean, this is a difficult thing to say because on certain accounts, the economy is one of them. Just in terms of the capability of the state, the Houthi state is quite capable of sort of managing society. Whereas there is no state in the rest of Yemen. The opponents are all divided amongst themselves. They're sort of warlords. Uh,
Oh,
and but on the other hand, people know that the Houthi are repressive, that you can disappear in a Houthi jail and that's it, And there are some high profile political opponents who are still being held by the Houthis. Um, and so, people recognize that the Houthi are repressive, that they're going to force you to they're going to tax you. They're going to force you to give over, for their political efforts or for their war or something like that. And they've rearranged the educational system so it's all geared towards Houthi ideology and Houthi theology, all this kind of stuff. And so it's a mixed people have mixed feelings about it.
yeah, yeah. Um, our conversation is not about Lebanon, and uh, I don't want to go there, but I'm just wondering, based on the very little that I know about Hezbollah, um, the Houthis seem to be entirely different than Hezbollah. Not that that should be a surprise. They're different peoples, different, locations, geography, but Hezbollah seems to be much more connected to Iran than the Houthis are, based on what you shared with me in our conversation.
Um, Maybe I would say the big difference between Hezbollah and the Houthi are that Hezbollah doesn't run the government. I mean, they have kind of a state within the state, but they, you know, they
Oh.
they participate in a wider Lebanese government. The Houthi claim to be the government. They claim that they are the government, and that everybody else is a foreign mercenary. That all the rest of the yeah.
I see. If you wanted our audience to remember just one point about modern Yemen after everything we've talked about, what would it be?
Oh, uh, I guess I would say that remember that that Yemen, it's now a very populous country. There are a lot of Yemeni. I think it's 33,000 or something, 33 million, excuse me, Yemeni. That it's got a long tradition. That it's got a lot of people who would like a liberal tradition, and that the Houthi are not though they claim to be. They are not, the face of Yemen.
They are not the face of Yemen.
No, there's a lot of other Yemenis and a lot of other currents in Yemen, a lot of wonderful currents in. I mean, Yemen in the 1990s, the early 1990s, when it's going through its sort of liberal renaissance with all the political parties and the elections and whatnot, was just an incredible place to be. Yemenis
Were you there then?
Yeah, and the Yemenis are very creative. They make do with very little, but very resourcefully. And one of their favorite things to do, they sit in the afternoons and they chew khat, which is this mild stimulant. Then everybody just sits around and discusses the world. And amongst intellectuals, you find some very stimulating. And you can go and sit with powerful people and very prominent people, and everybody will sit together and have these conversations, and it's just a wonderful place to be. And remember that tradition of Yemen.
Oh, that's wonderful. We don't do that often enough in our own country, right? Sit down and have these conversations. Dr. Schmitz, thank you so much for educating me and our listeners. And to our listeners, if you know of any history that could unravel the Middle East, please share it with us. Thanks very much, Dr. Schmitz.